Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Searchcast. Today my guest is Brian Kerb, an SEO manager at Neighborly, a very astute technical SEO. He's been in the game for over 8 years, someone that I personally worked with, and someone I'm lucky enough to call a great friend. Thanks for coming on, Brian.
Hey, glad to be here.
So Brian, you've been in the game for a while. Yeah, how'd you get started in SEO? Did was it something that was offered at university? You self-taught, agency taught? How did you get into the game? How did you get into SEO?
So, kind of randomly, my background was before I got into SEO, as you may, if you're watching the video, see behind me, I had a liquidation sports apparel business for many years, selling on third-party websites, Shopify, as well as other platforms. So I got to a point where kind of league changes, so like Reebok for the NFL switched from Reebok to Nike, and just other changes in licensing. A big player named Fanatics kind of came along the scene and started monopolizing the industry. So I got to a point where I couldn't really make a living doing that anymore. So I kind of looked around and like, where did my experience kind of lie? And I just kind of fell in the SEO. There's a lot of overlap, having had worked with websites and you know being in the code with HTML, that it was just a real smooth transition for me to kind of move over.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a something that you see a lot with more experienced SEOs is SEO wasn't always a thing, right? And then people kind of just stumble upon it, and you kind of exactly you match up your kind of career, what you've done in the past, and like what does this apply to? And then SEO is kind of that thing. SEO is a great career for anybody that has tinkered with websites or just a blog. You have a passion for something, you made money off of something. It's so smart. But being an entrepreneur, I think that is so helpful for any job, but especially in the world of digital marketing. Just because if you've been an entrepreneur, you're a little more accountable. You're a self starter. What are some other things that being an entrepreneur, helped you transition into a solid SEO career?
I think as SEO has changed and has gone more and more this way, you have to be able to be vocal and get buy-in from multiple different parties. There's going to be some variance on the vertical, but it's not just lock the SEO in the back room and then come out 3 months later with a bunch of code changes. That's not really the way this industry is moving.
Absolutely, and yeah, and then in the SEO world, it's just so dynamic in the sense of there's so many different niches of SEO, whether it's like affiliate, enterprise, local, e-commerce, technical content. There's so many different avenues there. What are some of your favorites that or do you specialize in any, or do you have any favorites that you practice the most?
It's for myself, it's probably a mix between some of the content planning and process, as well as I'm pretty astute on the technical end. So kind of in somewhere in that lane is really my sweet spot.
Yeah, I can definitely vouch for your technical prowess on SEO. It's fun to talk to you about that. When it comes
Definitely.
to technical SEO, like when it comes to, let's start with like enterprise SEO, managing SEO for larger brands. Have you seen that? Have you seen much of a shift in the last couple of years for in the world of, of enterprise SEO?
It really varies on how large the websites are. You're seeing a lot of movement for like the Zillows of the world to like programmable SEO or programmatic SEO, I believe they call it, where they're trying to dynamically create niche like neighborhood pages on the fly. So there's a lot more technical and really development level items that go into that. It's ties into SQL and managing very large databases. That would be the biggest shift I've seen at the kind of enterprise level.
I think that's spot on. Programmatic is definitely becoming a thing, right? Where even just 5, 6 years ago, it was very small in the SEO world. Not many people ever heard about it. A lot of people thought it was kind of maybe borderline black hat, just because of just by the nature of what it is scaling multiple pages. But then you fast forward to today, and then you have ChatGPT content, AI content. There's a million different AI content generating tools out there, and there's kind of a fine line between programmatic and AI spawn generated content. So it's pretty interesting how those worlds collided, and here we are today. But do you have any tips for if someone's looking to get into an enterprise SEO career? they want to take their site to the next level. Do you have any actionable tips for that?
It's really, if you're breaking into the space, take as much work as you can get in as many different verticals as possible, and be the person who is willing to tackle any problems. That's part of the reason that my career advanced so quickly, was because people figured out if there was a problem that we didn't have somebody in house to figure out a solution. Um, the majority of the time, I would come up with something, or I would come up with an action plan that we could easily identify and bring somebody else from the outside in to help address that.
I think that's a great point. In 2024, there's a lot of talk about, is AI going to replace SEOs? Should we be worried? I'd love to know your take on that. But my take on it is exactly what you said. If you are a strategist and you're a problem solver, if people can rely on you, your job is going to be completely safe. SEO is still you're gonna have a career in SEO for as long as you want one. But you have to be that strategist. So, how did you kind of sharpen that tool belt when it comes to SEO strategy?
Took a lot of different courses. Really, my entire strategy, and this is not just in digital marketing but in life, has been to find the smartest people in the room and try and learn from them. So identify whoever in the space. For myself, I'll drop some names. For SEO, Ryan Stewart, Nathan Gotch. Those were really the two kind of influencers in our space who I latched onto, as they had a proven model, they showcase the results. It's not a bunch of fluff, and those have been really the individuals who I took the building blocks, learning from them, and then started piecing on additional layers as my career has progressed.
Yeah, definitely shout out to Ryan Stewart and Nathan Gotch. Amazing SEOs in their own right. And they've given back to the SEO community so much in terms of just being pretty transparent with some of their strategies. And, that's what SEO was back when I started, 12, 13 years ago. Was there was no YouTube for a bunch of SEO things. There was Moz and there was some influencers, right? So I think that part that's remained is still super cool. But to take it a step deeper on what you just said, again, it's accountability part, right? You have to be still a little bit self motivated to go out there and find those resources and do a little bit of self training to kind of progress yourself. And I think a lot of people when they start in the world of SEO or digital marketing, a lot of the times it's agency or in house, and they're just waiting to be fed their next task or their next learning or their next training or the next methodology or playbook. But you need to be spending time on your own to go out there and advance your career if you want to get there faster. You can certainly sit there and wait for the next task or the next learning. But if you can be proactive in it, you're gonna ascend your curve for sure. So totally agree with that. When it comes to, I think that's a good segue into you becoming an SEO leader in management. What do you look for when you hire talent to come work for your team?
I bucket everybody into different areas. What I generally look for in the current role is somebody who's a problem solver, somebody who can think outside the box. It doesn't necessarily have to be they don't necessarily have to be the sharpest SEO in the world. What I need is somebody who can fix solutions, and as you alluded to, not be looking elsewhere constantly for answers. Because in SEO, the higher up you go and the less um, templatized like the industry you work in, the more nuanced and niche it is, there are no answers. You can't Google it on the internet. There's a handful of people out here in this industry that really have solutions and have put together a strategy that have worked. So just to add on to that a little bit, so I use a lot of sports analogies. There's folks who just get things done. I call them kind of the Dennis Rodmans of the world. They're the ones who you can just turn the keys over. They're great defenders. They just do all the work that you assign to them. And then there are the people who are kind of like your whatever, your Michael Jordans, your Kobe Bryants, the playmakers, the folks who go out there and they kind of carry the team. So there's a lot of that, and there's nothing wrong with being a Dennis Rodman in this space. I can tell you that you're highly valued. It's just figuring out what you do best and really trying to maximize that.
So to summarize, it's kind of like you want to build a balanced team. You need to have both a combination of the playmakers, but you also need to have the people that are going to go in there and get their hands dirty and do the dirty work and dive for loose balls and play hard defense, get every rebound. It's just like a straight effort, right?
Absolutely, because otherwise there's going to be something in your SEO process where it doesn't get done. It's a weakness, or it's some. We all have some tasks that we just absolutely hate doing, and you want to find somebody who loves doing those tasks and can get it done efficiently. So resources are free, and you just have a smooth flowing team.
Yeah, and I can vouch. I've seen it firsthand. The way you lead teams, and it's smart and it's cool. One thing I noticed about you when you lead teams is, eventually the people that report to you end up thinking along the lines of what you're thinking. So it's kind of like a right hand person, and um, that only builds over time. But I think that's the sign of a true leader and someone that can scale a program. So, kudos to you, Brian. I've really enjoyed getting to see that firsthand. So
Yeah,
exactly what you said.
yeah. One thing I would add there as well in my management style is always I'm open to ideas. There are things that I thought were SEO best practices 4 or 5 years ago where I will come back today and I will say, I've changed my mind. That's not correct. I've been convinced otherwise, or the data has shown me otherwise. And there's always room and opportunity there. This is an ever evolving space.
Yeah, and to circle back to Ryan Stewart, for example, he just had a webinar, was it like a month ago, about like personal injury and local SEO attorneys, and many years ago he was kind of saying I would never do that; it's a waste of time. It's kind of the same philosophy though, right? He literally owned up to it. He's like, hey, I was wrong. Like, now that I spent some time in it, and the data shows it. It is definitely worth investing. So local SEO is definitely here to stay. You can see day in and day out, Google's getting more and more localization in the search results. I know that you have a big background in local SEO. What are some of the things that you've seen shift over the last couple of years?
I think the way that Google has structured the search results is it's just more and more emphasis higher up on the page. So we see the LSAs, we see the ads. In some instances, we even see like YouTube videos. And then the number one thing is definitely the map packs. That's what's really driving the leads for most businesses, um, in the space in the various spaces.
No, I agree. I've said it before on the podcast, and not a lot of people are talking about it, or not as many as that should. But your website needs to be well optimized to prop up your Google Business Profile. 70 to 80% of your traffic and leads, organically SEO, are going to come offsite, which is mind blowing to a lot of people because it's all about their website. But the website is just a good prop for your GBP to show where you want it to show. So spot on, totally agree. There's been a lot of news this month in May. With the March broadcore kind of ending right around the early parts of May, late April, still a little bit debatable. Some people think it's still going, which there's merit there, but just in the last this last week or last 2 weeks, the AI overlay is crazy. There's a little bit of impact to local SEO there, but just this week, Google announced that starting in July, the Google Business Profile call history tracking is going away, which is terrifying for those small business owners. One actionable tip I have for everybody listening is if you have a Google Business Profile right now, and that's a core metric that you're tracking, you need to make sure that you have call tracking numbers on there through a third party because Google's taken away that metric directly from Insights, which is, it's a scary time for SEOs. Anything else to add to that, Brian?
Yeah, there's one other thing that's kind of come up that I think is a lot of opportunities for different verticals in the local SEO space. We're seeing GBPs, just how they're verified, change. Not everybody with a home office can get a GBP verified anymore. And kind of going on, I know there's some economic headwinds in many industries, but we're also at a point where like commercial real estate has tanked. So there's opportunities for like a lawyer or possibly a plumber, somebody who's got a high ticket, high revenue business to go rent office space for $500-600 a month. Just do the bare minimum and go through and calculate, how many leads, how many calls do I have to get to go set up like a little quasi satellite office to go into a city that's 30-40 miles away from me and start building a presence there. So there's a ton of opportunity there. I think you a lot of businesses could still be first movers advantage if they jump on this quickly. Just some two sets. Great opportunity that I see out there right now.
I think that's super smart, right? And again, it's all about data driven decisions. So that recommendation is amazing. If you can find those commercial properties and you can't lease it for super cheap, the square footage really doesn't matter because it's really just about getting that map placement. You're gonna have to have signage and everything. It's gonna take a lot more to verify than it had in the past, but more oftentimes than not, if you are a high ticket service, it is gonna pay dividends. And the other part too is
It's
on the same
proximity.
token,
We know
it
proximity
matters so
also
much.
plays so much, so that's really the driving factor I would argue in that strategy.
Absolutely, and taking it one step further, if you have a service area business, meaning you verified your home address at one point, if you can afford to go get an actual location, like Brian just said, upgrading that also could pay dividends. Joy Hawkins has done a case study on it. I think Darren Shaw at White Spark did as well. In a past stop I had, we did a big case study on over 3,000 locations, and we saw that it was basically a 3x increase in leads and visibility for physical address versus service area businesses. So you do your own calculations there, but yeah, having that physical address is super important. Oftentimes, I would say if you can get one for $500 a month, you're going to get more from that than increasing an SEO budget by $2,000 a month. Just because of that proximity is such a strong factor.
And even if you're buying ads too, the PPC, we all know those have been quite inflated. Um, Again, a lot of industries, I think it's a no-brainer, but there are multiple aspects at play. But definitely look into penciling that out because it could be a foothold for anyone's business into just a whole nother market if they've been kind of on the fence about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, localization and Google are just so huge, right? I mean, just I oftentimes say on this podcast, listen to what Google says, but invest in what Google does. Right? Like, there's just so many examples throughout the last 5 or 6 years of Google saying one thing and then they change the algorithm to specifically combat what they just said. One example being EAT, right? EAT came out in 2017, and then November of 2022, Google softened their stance on AI generated content. They were kind of like, as long as it's helpful, we don't care how it's generated, right? And then everybody in the SEO space, search engine land, et cetera, were like, oh my God, this is huge. AI content is basically acceptable. 1 month later, December of 2022, they rolled out EEAT with that new E being experience, which is something that large language models can't replicate, right? So what they say versus what they do, it's two different things oftentimes, which is super fascinating. Um, you know, Speaking of, kind of around that topic of what Google says versus what Google does, obviously Google had the search documents leaked, 1,400 different ranking factors in there. Did you have a chance to dive into those much?
I have not had a chance to dive into those a ton.
Well, I think one major takeaway, and it's something that, you know, well, first of all, they are leaked. Yeah, I think they are real. I think they're legitimate. But if you've been doing quality SEO, it doesn't really matter. Nothing really changed. So, I know that you and I have had a lot of conversations offline about, just content refreshes and how important they are. And that's one of the major takeaways that you're seeing across the blogs and LinkedIn and Twitter and Reddit is just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe freshness is such a strong signal. But again, it comes down to just fundamental SEO, and it's kind of wild how mind blowing this is to a majority of the SEO industry right now.
In kind of piggybacking on to do what Google, not what they say, but what they do. So most people in the industry saw kind of the deal that they inked with Reddit. One of the things that I've highly been advising anybody who's creating content is to create content that has a little bit of opinion to it and that has an author bio so you can trace back who it is, because AI is going to, at this point of the game, it can change. Obviously, we're early in the technology, but it's kind of just regurgitating what it sees. It's not forming independent opinions. So anytime that you can form that independent opinion, and if you are like a plumber or somebody where you can take actual pictures and showcase, like, this is what we see in X and X place in the country with certain types of like mold we see under toilets or something because it leaks, like, you're gonna really stand out, and that's not something that AI can replicate yet, in my opinion, from everything that I've seen.
Absolutely. And other things that AI is not good at is still creating visuals that are relevant to the context of a page. So I think, having multimedia, whether it's images, videos, whatever it might be, that's still another separator between good content or, probably helpful content and unhelpful content. Um, you know, I saw a cool case study that you did, um, you know, uh, unlisted brand, but by just adding images to a blog post that is identifying, I forget what it was, like 7 different types of whatever. It had really good long form content on there, but then you added some visuals, and then boom, there was like a massive increase in just clicks, impressions, rankings, kind of everything. So it's a freshness. It's also just making your content more helpful and doing things that AI still can't do. So that was really cool.
Yeah, and that ties into what is something kind of touchy for a lot of SEOs is diving into UX principles. A lot of times the SEO teams that you may be part of, they're just like, oh, well, you do UX also, when it's also its own industry. But just understanding, like, on a blog post, if I have jump links, if I have a table of contents, if I have visual representation of what I'm talking about to help reinforce the subject matter that's being presented, that's always going to go a long way. Um, with regards to the readers, but as well as the search engines trying to understand the content and the what exactly the page is geared towards.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, to your point, like table of contents, it's kind of a hot topic right now in the SEO space. Some people just absolutely just hate it, and some people love it. I'm a fan of it because I think again it makes it helpful. And when you're looking at some of these AI overlays, some of them are pulling directly from the table of contents. So if you have optimized headings for throughout the page, like you should, and you make those table of contents, sometimes those are what's showing up in the AI overlay. So I think
Yeah,
again, another spot on analysis.
we've seen that for many years with the featured snippet box as well. It's been pulling the jump links from a table of contents as well.
I think another strength that you have is you have a bit of a background because you used to do SEO for like a lot of the finance kind of stuff. So I want to touch on that a little bit. Not so much the strategies there, but it helps. What I'm trying to frame is if you want to take the next step in your SEO career, you have to understand how to talk to leadership, right? And when you get to the level that you're at, and you're talking to CMOs and board of directors and CEOs, they run their business and their life off of a P&L, right? It's just everything's pretty black and white. It's a dollar and cents conversation. It's ROI, it's ROAS, etc. So, an actionable tip for everybody out there is if you're talking to someone in the C level or upper management leadership, they don't care about Screaming Frog, right? They care about how your projects are going to translate into dollars and cents. Do you have anything to add to that, Brian?
Yeah, it comes down to knowing your audience. It can be C-level folks like you are talking about, just understanding what's important to them. I would also say, as a SEO, understand the position that they are in. Always be ready to advocate for SEO, but understand that there are other marketing channels and other initiatives with every brand or business that you work with that may take a little bit of precedent, or they may just kind of pull away from what you're trying to do. There may be some guardrails or blocking activities. So it's really just trying to make trying to understand that you really have to be able to communicate that and understand it, and just be almost a politician in many ways, for learning how to get things done. That's um, one of the most important things I can say with regards to that. Because with SEO, like for example, in my position, I could be speaking with somebody who's at the board level. It could be somebody who's in leadership, C level, like you mentioned. I could also be speaking to an individual franchise owner, as well as somebody who's on my team. And each person that you deal with is going to have a different structure, and they're going to have a different viewpoint of how they look at SEO and its importance.
So I think what you're kind of getting at is just it's about driving value to the right audience.
Absolutely. No, they say know your customer in the financial industry, know your audience when you're dealing with different folks in the SEO space.
I think that's the best advice from this whole segment so far is just driving the value to your audience. That's both, internally in your day to day when you're talking to your internal teams, but it still applies to on site content too, right? Like search intent, understanding your audience, it all kind of goes hand in hand together. You've had good experience at agencies, in house. You've worked with a lot of agencies. Let's talk about that. What do you think makes a great agency partner?
Someone, the best agency partners are ones who are very responsive, who get things done, who almost proactively to the point bug you to follow up on things that are behind. Uh, those are generally the best agency partners that I've dealt with. But when you do talk about agencies, there's a wide variety of skill level niches and verticals that they can deal with and what they're best suited for. Some technical, some content, some local listings. It can be all over the place. I do think that most of the pain points and the reasons that companies leave a certain agency is because they're not conveying the overall results and how it affects the business case. It could be long term. If it's going to take a long time, we're building out this blog to help boost the kind of overall brand presence. That's a much different story than just kind of saying, oh, we did a technical crawl and we fixed X amount of internal links. It's very hard to convey that to individuals who are most worried about the bottom line, um, how that impacted their business.
I think, I think that's exactly right. If you are in an in-house position, and you're so big that you need an agency partner, having mutual accountability is so important, right? Like they should be an extension of your team, which I think that's totally great. What are some red flags for an agency partner?
I would say non-communi- non-communication, hard to get a hold of. It's not always true, but sometimes a lot of turnover at an agency can be a little bit of a flag. In general, agencies, the digital marketing world, you will see larger turnover than other industries, so you have to take that into account. But if you have somebody new every 6 months, there's a little bit of a red flag there, especially if things are constantly delayed and you're constantly questioning what are we paying for. If that's something that's constantly coming up, then there's a good chance that it's time to start vetting other partners to work with.
I think that's super smart. I think another red flag for me would be if they just double down on things that just clearly aren't working just because they worked in the past, right? So I guess maybe another way to frame that would be having an open mind. It is frustrating when you can see, declines in revenue and leads and whatever it might be for month after month after month, and you have this same call every month. Like, what are we going to do different? And like, we're just going to keep doing the same thing because it used to work for us. It's always worked for us, but at a certain point, it doesn't, and you have to have that flexibility from that agency partner. So, yeah, definitely spot on, Brian. I appreciate those insights for sure. Let's kind of pivot a little bit. We talked about CMS is kind of earlier on in the conversation. We haven't really revisited that. If you're, do you think how much of an impact do you think CMSs have in the world of SEO?
That's a little bit of a loaded question. Our favorite answer as SEOs is it depends. Um,
Yep.
there's always the cost um, consideration. So if you are a very small business, local business, using WordPress or Squarespace or one of these really plug and play CMSs, in many cases, not always, there are some that are very bad, but in many cases they can work and get the job done. As you scale, it is important to be able to have a website that you can find people that can work on. One of the things that I have found at the enterprise level is they've created this huge website, and I some designers will do this likely by purpose because it kind of keeps them stuck with them. Is they've created something where they're the only ones who know how to work on it, so everything has to run through them, and it's not always the most efficient process, especially when you're trying to make mass scale updates. Waiting weeks for one programmer who's had the contract for 10 years to come back to you and try and come up with a solution. And sometimes the solutions aren't even applicable or can really be done at a with best SEO practices in mind.
I absolutely 100% agree, and I love that answer. If there's anybody listening out there and you're thinking about switching CMSs, you're not on the SEO team, maybe you're a brand manager or a CMO or whoever, and you're thinking about migrating to a different CMS, please get your SEO team involved. There's so many different factors that go into it. And to Brian's point, a lot of times there's all these bells and whistles, and sometimes they're not needed. But what they do cause is a bit of a bottleneck because instead of having access to where, to like say WordPress, where every web development person, most SEOs understand how to use it very very well, so you're gonna be able to find extra resources for cheap. You have these specialized people that's super expensive. So the analogy would be like if you have a Toyota Honda Civic, every mechanic in the world can work on a Honda Civic, right? If you have a BMW or a Lamborghini, it's a much more specialized type of work, and you're going to have to go straight to the dealership, and they can mark it up to whatever they want because you're basically, at their mercy. So, some of the biggest websites in the world are ran on WordPress. So scalability is not an issue. I think just really ask yourself and ask your SEO team and your other digital marketing teams, like, do we really need this, custom CMS or new CMS in general? Sometimes it's necessary, right? Sometimes you have a website that was, custom coded and that business has just gone away. So you can't make updates. Then you have to switch, right? But switching just for the sake of switching is oftentimes not the best move. Because website migrations in general are a tricky task. And Brian, I know you have experience doing website migrations. Maybe we should touch on that a little bit too. But what I've seen in my career is, people lose 50, 70% of their traffic during a migration. Wix is a great example, or WooCommerce is a great example, right? They went from WooCommerce to Woo, and they lasted about 2 years. They saw all of their traffic just disappear, so they just recently migrated back, and that traffic came back pretty quickly. But you, as a technical SEO, what are some practical tips that you would give people that are looking to migrate a website successfully without a massive decline in traffic and rankings?
Take your time. Try not to change URLs. A well done migration, Google is almost going to see it as though there is no change at all to the website. Those would be the main tips. I did want to piggyback off of what you mentioned a little bit with regards to uh, changing CMSs. One thing that I've seen is sometimes in house, you'll have different parties that kind of dictate what happens. So most websites are kind of built on PHP. I have come into instances where kind of the team is a Microsoft in house team and they're built on .NET. So all of a sudden, just so that they can support it, doesn't matter what's going to happen in traffic. That person, most programmers don't like coding in different languages, so they'll be like, no, it has to be on .NET. Most SEOs that look don't really deal with .NET either. It's kind of nuanced for ones who do are technical and really dive into the code. So those are just always kind of considerations. And as you mentioned, also it's much harder to find somebody to work on those sites. So I have kind of been at agencies where like Salesforce Commerce Cloud, I believe it has a new name now, but it's built on .NET. They had to hire somebody specifically to do updates for a client just because it wasn't built on PHP like Magento or some of the other larger e-commerce ones.
Yeah, e-commerce is a whole other story. We probably don't have enough time to cover all of e-commerce in one episode, but yeah, I think e-commerce and program. Well, we touched on programmatic a little bit, and I think it's kind of a similar path to success there. But yeah, e-commerce and affiliate marketing are two completely different niches, and yeah, you can dive super deep into those for sure.
Uh, Absolutely.
Uh, you know, Speaking of agencies, and just again, this podcast is hopefully helpful to people that are a little bit earlier in their careers looking to take that next move up the chain. But to your point earlier, there's a lot of turnovers at agencies for many reasons. Oftentimes, not because the agency's bad, just because they found a better opportunity, pays more money, maybe it's remote, whatever it might be. What are some green flags for like good culture?
Are you kind of talking about going into like vetting an agency or like knowing when you get there? Because I've found in many instances it's hard to tell exactly what an agency is like until you get there, or you know somebody very close that works there. They can have all the accolades in the world and you get there and you're just like, wow, this is really kind of elementary SEO compared to what I was expecting.
No, I think that's spot on. I was talking about more like if you are looking, if you're interviewing in different places, right? If you say you're earlier on in your career, maybe Brian from 5 years ago, right? Knowing what you know now, what are
Mhm.
some signs of things that would be like, hey, I think this agency is probably, or this company is probably got a good culture and something that I would like to work at and work there for several years. What are some of those signs, or maybe it's like what are some questions you should be asking on those interviews to help you determine if it is a good culture or not?
Definitely the main thing for me would be who I'm working for, who I'm working under, kind of making sure that I at least meet them in the interview process, because that's a huge part of your workday. You don't want to be stuck working for somebody that you don't get along with, and sometimes it just happens. Not all personalities work together. Also, the type of projects that you work on, if you have a specialty or a niche or just a general field. There's a lot of folks who do enterprise SEO that want nothing to do with local listings and local SEO, vice versa. Technical SEO, a lot of folks don't want to touch that. They only want to work on local SEO. So really understanding where you want to be, what you want to work on, and that's what I would look for earlier in the career. As you mentioned, it's really just learning as much as possible from as many different folks as you can to kind of build out your tool set, because each place you go, you're gonna learn different things. You may only pick up one or two different tricks from each person that you work with, but after several years, pretty soon that bag of tools is pretty darn big.
Yeah, and that's kind of progress of an SEO is you're gonna like SEO if you're comfortable knowing that you're never gonna know everything, right? You're just gonna be continually learning. I started this, 20, 12, 13 years ago. I still learn something new all the time, um, mainly because you have to. Google's just changing so much. It's completely wild. The month of May of 2024, for example, just between Google I/O's launch, the AI overlays, visual search coming to play, Google messing with the Google business profile, call history going away, um, you know, I saw some search results, this week where infinite scroll was gone. They went back to page numbers 1, 2, 3, etc. So I haven't seen that in a couple years. So there's always just something new to be looked at and testing. And if you don't get tired of testing theories, if you're a theory person, you're gonna love this industry. And I think that that's what helps you kind of become a strategist. So anything else to add to that?
I think you're spot on. It's always evolving. There's always going to be differences in what works, what doesn't work. There's always new opportunities. So, I mean, like another example of something that I would start focusing on again in kind of the local space would be what used to be called barnacle SEO, kind of tying yourself into Home Advisor and Yelp and all the different listing aggregators to try and latch onto those. It's not necessarily directing traffic back to your website, but it is important for brand visibility. It's harder to showcase those results, but when you are showing up there, it is additional leads to the brands. And when you can kind of point that out and say, hey, we took this strategy of review generation and we're doing better, it showcases that you are contributing to the bottom line. And more than anything, that's what a company or a small business is going to care about. And that's whether, no matter if you're on the agency side or you're in house.
Speaking not so much of Barnacle SEO, but you touched on Reddit earlier. Is Reddit something that you would invest in terms of your SEO strategy since it's just so prominent in there? Or is that be something that you kind of caution and advise people to stay away from?
I would definitely come up with a strategy for certain industries, lawyers, real estate agents, anybody who's constantly out there kind of just throwing money around trying to get visibility for to be top of mind whenever they actually need that service. I would say those would be the ones that make the most sense. Your local plumber, you sometimes will see those search results come up, but I would have a hard time advocating that you need a Reddit strategy for those at this time.
I think I'm in alignment with you. You know, my recommendation would be if you are a product, there's no getting around Reddit. People are going to be googling your product, seeing what's what. So you need to make sure you're monitoring those subreddits and making sure you're replying to comments, both good and bad, right? To get out ahead of it, because people do care about the customer service and the post purchase follow up. If you are a service, you know, it's a double edged sword. Sure, it's going to rank, but it's also easy for one of your competitors to anonymously just start talking mad smack about you, and then that stuff doesn't go away, right? So you never want to get into a shouting match on the internet. Nobody wins in that situation. You know, that'd be my words of advice. If you're a product, pursue it. You're gonna have to. If you are just a brand or a service, you know, be careful what you ask for. If someone starts it for you, you need to have the same strategy. Definitely reply and be monitor those. You can use Google Alerts, for example. That's a free tool. There's paid tools, and obviously the Reddit, right? Your Reddit account. So those are some actionable tips for Reddit SEO. Any as we're wrapping this up, Brian, any predictions for SEO in 2024?
My prediction is that it'll change. Like always, it'll be less of a change than everybody's freaking out about, and all the AI stuff is super early. I always like to say, even the internet, it took folks like 10 years before they felt comfortable putting their credit card and buying something. So even all these AI overviews, I think the majority of folks are kind of looking at them, but they don't yet trust them. So they are scrolling down the page or looking at the linked out two pages to just kind of verify and fact check. But that doesn't mean 8 years down the line we aren't all comfortable with it and we are trusting the AI overviews that Google is sharing with us.
I think you're spot on. I love that analogy. It did take people forever to trust online transactions. I remember, you know, just well, when I was in high school, even that was you know a little over 15 years ago or something. But I would always call the company and give them my credit card number over the phone versus putting on the internet, right? Because you just everyone was so afraid of being hacked or scammed or whatever. So I think that's totally spot on. There's going to be early adopters, but there's not going to be many. It's going to take a lot more time for people to accept it. I do think that Google Maps is such a big proponent of people's everyday search habits now. If they somehow make that into the AI overlay, that might be a good way for Google to get more adoption quicker. But they need to clean it up. There's just so much misinformation that they're that they're showing on the search results right now. The AI overlay, it's very very wild. I think Google just addressed it this morning, and it's kind of like what they say versus what they do, two different things. You know, they were kind of saying, well, AI overlay is pretty accurate because we're pulling from the top search results, but then like you look at Lily Ray's article, and she's like, there's so many examples of them pulling in stuff from site links that are down like 100 links, page 10, what used to be page 10. So they're not the top search results. So it's really interesting how that's working. I think the leak of the 1400 AI of the algorithm signals is kind of playing a part in that too, because some of these older factors that maybe still be more prominent than we think they are. But at the end of the day, keep doing white hat SEO. It's not a revelation what got leaked. If you're doing a good job, if you've been doing a good job, you're going to continue doing a job regardless of what you're doing out there. Don't fall for some like ebook that's like, oh, here's the 20 most important things from the 1400 that you need to do to every website. SEO is not cookie cutter. It never will be. Every page, every website, every project is going to be unique in its own scope, and treat it like that. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I will say, just kind of talking about the historical aspect of SEO, we're almost in year 20 of Google being a public company. That was right around the time that I took my first HTML class in high school. And there was no SEO jobs to my ability or to my knowledge. So all this AI stuff, it's likely to spawn an entire different industry in itself. Um, so there's a lot of things that are going to change. So don't just feel like SEO is dead. SEO is basically matured. So Google has actually got to the point where it's paying a dividend now. That's usually the hallmark for a company, that it's matured. It's no longer in hyper growth phase. So I think in many ways the quick black hat went days are over, and it's more of a longer term build something from the ground up that's supposed to be here for a long time. I think that's going to be the strategy that works um, through and through, regardless of kind of the noise that we're dealing with, as the SERPs in this space always changes.
Just have to say, not financial advice.
Absolutely never.
Brian, thanks so much for coming on, man. Really appreciate it. Where can people follow you at?
LinkedIn, I'm likely one of two Brian Curbs in the country. Also, if you were to put in your address bar, briancurb.com, or Google me, I should be the first website there. It'll have my contact information and how to get a hold of me.
Thanks so much, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Shane.